there's apps now. So I also wrote an erotic story for Furly, which is a women's pleasure app, or there's Saya. I never know how to pronounce them, but there's audio erotica, and that's a gentle. I find that those two, like talking about those two ways of accessing material outside of visually, is a much gentler way because it allows young people to use their imagination. And although you're reading and absorbing information, you can create the scene in your head. And that's a much healthier way of viewing and creating ideas around sex, rather than saying, watch this, condition yourself to only like this, or that this is the only way. And you can have so much more fun with your own mind, or saying to young people, well, or young people, this applies to anyone at any age that has never thought about this before, like, okay, write a list of, you don't have to share it with anyone. And I would never also do this in a classroom, just as a caveat. But to say, have you thought about, aside from the porn you watch, because most people have watched porn by the time, I think the stats say by the time a young person is 13 or 12, they've seen some form of porn, whether it's in social media or someone sharing it in a WhatsApp group or actively seeking porn. But I think that asking young people to use their imaginations and to create scenarios or ideas for themselves puts them in a position to understand themselves more, feel maybe less weird, and be conditioned less, and yes, have better sex and feel better in their bodies. I think that that's the whole point. But a lot comes down to self-esteem. And yeah, if you're just consuming material that's already someone else's idea, then you have no chance, especially at that young age, to form your own ideas around it. And I think that leads also into sexuality. If you're only from body image to sexuality to looking at body shape and body positivity, body neutrality is what people are looking at now. If you only see two types of people or two types of relationship, then that leaves no space for your own exploration and your own sense of self.
What would you say to a parent who knows that they need to have this conversation with their child? So like, I'm just thinking, my son's 6. And maybe I talk to him about sex, but not nearly on the level that we're talking about today. It's too advanced. But I know that in, say, 4 or 5 years, I'm going to have more detailed conversation. What sort of tools would you give to a parent like me that would have to have this conversation with their child?
I think sometimes we focus a lot on sex, and it's more sort of the conversations that come before that. Like you said, the conversation we're having right now is too much for a 6-year-old. That probably doesn't even get half the things we're talking about. But it comes before that in the sense of communicating, like creating a space where your child is able to communicate freely with you about their bodies, what's changing, even like looking at different, like the body as a whole, like not just sexual organs, like look how your feet have grown, or like now you're this age, and keeping it age appropriate. So, and the things that are age appropriate, like kids understand their bodies, and they can also understand the differences that come with age. But I also think that following your son's lead, and there's a lot of fear of, when do I have this conversation? And some of it is like, your son will let you know when he's ready to have this conversation. But it first starts with creating that environment where you can have this conversation, and the questions will come. And when they come, one thing we learn in our course, which I really liked, is when a question's asked by a child, always respond, but you don't always have to answer directly. And that gives you space to make it appropriate for that child in that situation, in that moment. But always respond, and never say, no, we can't talk about that, because that shuts them down. It starts a shame cycle, and then it's like, well, I can't have this conversation. So follow your son's lead, I would say, and just start by, it doesn't have to be a sit-down conversation. Just answer questions as they come. And they will come.
And what would you say to a parent who is less open to sexuality themselves, but knows that they need to have these conversations, but feels quite, I guess you could say, quite typically British in the way they feel quite embarrassed about having such an intimate conversation?
I think making it normal. So I know there's been a huge movement. I feel like it shouldn't be a movement, but it is, in terms of diversity in children's books. So if you are buying books even for your children, like maybe buying a book where the parents are not heterosexual or something like that, without making a huge point of it, but having that book as something that you've bought and you've decided to read with your child is like, oh yeah, it's two dads or it's two mums, and then but the story goes on. And I think that's what I was saying before, like there's a fear of this is going to be a big hard conversation, when actually it's just about making these conversations very normal. Because kids, I mean, they're asking you like, why is the sky blue next minute? And then they're asking you like, what's for dinner? Like 2 seconds later, and you haven't even finished. In your head, you're like, oh, why is the sky blue? And then they're like, oh, what's for dinner? Like, kids aren't caught on this, like, what is, like, I need to know this answer now. Like, it's, things flow through their brains so fast that it's just about making these things normal. It's like, oh, it's those two guys are not holding hands. It's like, oh yeah, they're holding hands like I hold hands with my partner or whoever. It's like, yeah, maybe they're in love, and then you keep the conversation moving. It's just about, I think, yeah, making these things normal, from like periods to sex to relationships and sexuality. Like, yeah.
So make it normal and so we can remove the shame around these conversations and topics. So if you've said a lot of really amazing pearls of wisdom during our conversation, if listeners take one thing away from this conversation, what would you want that to be?
I would say take the time to understand yourself. And you can use that, you can apply that into different areas of your life. It can be from looking at how your diet affects you to looking at your period over a month, but not just the bleeding part, but looking at your moods over that month. Like, is it related to your period? And the more you track yourself, whether it's food, your cycle, sexually even, like you could even track the moments over time when you feel super turned on or horny on that day and be like, oh, is that related to my cycle? Is that related to my mental health? So it's about joining the dots. But I would say try to understand yourself, choose sort of like one variable that you want to track, and then look at that variable in relation to other things. And choose, what's of interest to you at the moment. What is an area that you think you want to improve or understand more, and pick that. It doesn't have to be a huge tracking thing of everything of your life, from like your diet to your cycle and how many times you did exercise or didn't that week. Just start small, and the rest will fall into place.
Where can listeners find out more about you and the work that you do?
Head over to my Instagram, which is at ZazBrew, ZAZ.BRW. Yes, no S at the end. Sorry, I literally just had to. I don't even know what my own Instagram handle is. And then when my website's live, it will also be shared there.
Great. So they can contact you and find out more about your work and how to use your services.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been so amazing hearing your story and hearing about the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenise Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.